Right. Okay, so welcome everybody. It's good to see you here at this webinar today. So welcome wherever you are and wherever you're joining from. I'm Jan Webb and I'm the academic lead for the Open University Safeguarding courses. These courses, there's 3 of them. They're funded by our donor, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And as I've just mentioned, there's 3 safeguarding courses that we've developed over the past 1.5 years. And today, this webinar is part of the course 3, Leadership in Safeguarding in the International Aid Sector. And there will be a web link to course 3 on the chat box as well for those who perhaps aren't currently undertaking the course. And so if you're here and you're not on the course, it's great to see you. And this course that we're focusing on today has specifically been developed for those in leadership and government positions or those who aspire to be in those positions. And to date, we have almost 550 learners globally who have registered on this course and are taking part in online discussions with our trained educators. And the course is well underway. So this is the second of a series of 3 webinars that we are hosting as part of the blended course to provide learners an opportunity to listen, discuss the points raised in course 3 and learn from each other. The webinar is being recorded and the link will be shared on the online course for the learners to listen to as they continue with the course. But I'm now going to hand over to Anita Williams, who is our lead author and our international consultant for the safeguarding courses, and she will be moderating the panel discussion. So Anita, over to you.
Thank you, Jen. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be, to all our wonderful learners and participants joining us from all corners of the globe. As Jen says, I'm Anita Williams. I'm an international safeguarding consultant and lead author for the OU safeguarding courses, which are currently provided free to all of you, courtesy of our donors, FCDO. Thank you for taking time out from your busy schedule to join us here on the second webinar entitled Effective Management of Safeguarding Concerns for Leaders. This webinar is primarily focused on week 3 of our online course, that focuses on reporting, responding, and investigations. A meaty and technical topic, but essential in bringing about accountability in our sector. On the webinar, we'll be focusing on the following topics: learning lessons while improving organizational culture and accountability, equipping leaders with the right tools, resources, and approaches to manage safeguarding concerns, carrying out fair and impartial administrative investigations, and building resilience, self-care, and caring for others whilst managing safeguarding concerns. So similar to our first webinar, we have a wonderful panel of speakers and discussants this afternoon who have taken time out from their busy schedules to be here with us. They will share with us their different perspectives on how leaders can and should manage safeguarding concerns appropriately. Let me introduce them to you. They are, number 1, Dr. Tsitsi Chawatama Kwambana, a consultant pediatrician and board trustee. Tsitsi is an NHS-based pediatrician and global child health expert with an interest in safeguarding. Her experience spans a number of international NGOs and NGOs serving. She serves as a designated safeguarding trustee for UK Med and Centre Belle. Our NGO is based in the UK, and she's the vice chair of Africa Safeguarding Children, an NGO working with Black and ethnic minority communities here in the UK. And more recently, she became the chair of the board for Save the Children UK. Welcome, Tsitsi. Our second speaker and discussant this afternoon is Andrew McLaughlin. He's the IQTS manager of CHS Alliance, a membership organization based in Geneva, Switzerland. After 25 years in the police, mainly as a detective investigating serious and organized crime, Andrew managed fraud, corruption, and sexual misconduct investigations at the Australian federal government, the Global Fund, and the International Committee of the Red Cross. He is now the project manager of CHS Alliance Investigator Qualification Training Scheme, or IQTS, and he also manages CHS Alliance's complaints mechanism. Welcome, Andrew. Number 3, we have Lisa Riley. Lisa Riley is the Executive Director of Global Interagency Security Forum, known as GISF, an NGO-led forum with about 100 member organizations focused on keeping humanitarian workers safe. Lisa was originally an engineer. She worked overseas in the humanitarian sector for 13 years before returning to the UK, and now works to support staff safety, security, and well-being for humanitarians working globally. And last and not least is Anne Mariah, the Director of Organizational Health at Thrive Worldwide, an organization based in Kenya, focusing on the health and of development professionals. Anne's desire is to see leaders empowered to thrive in their life as they co-create healthy and safe organizations. Welcome to Anne. As usual, learners and participants on this webinar, a reminder that this is a learning event. It is part and parcel of the course that we have developed that is online for you. And therefore, you are welcome to provide your comments and short questions using the chat box on Zoom. And we will take those questions and comments once we open the floor after all the presentations. So thanks again for your patience as we started a few minutes late. So let's get right into it. So let me first ask Dr. Tsitsi to set the scene for us. In your role as board member and trustee, and as we know, we use the word trustee here in the UK, of several national and international NGOs, as well as being the chair of the board, what have leaders and board members learned regarding managing safeguarding concerns? What improvements have there been in organizational accountability? And has that made a difference in organizational culture? Thank you, Dr. Tsitsi.
Thank you, Anita. I could see my slides. Next slide, please. Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be on this webinar with you all. So thank you for inviting me. And just to set the context a bit about myself, I'm primarily a consultant pediatrician working in the NHS, and my work is really shrouded around child protection and safeguarding. I'm also passionate about international health and have worked in international development. And for the last decade, I've been sitting on a number of NGO boards as trustee. So in particular, safeguarding trustee role, and more recently I now chair Save the Children. So I am speaking and sharing the lessons that I have seen leaders and board members need to learn in managing safeguarding concerns, and speaking in my personal capacity, but just drawing from the experiences that I've had over the last few years. Next slide, please. So why is this important? With everything that we do, and as a pediatrician, absolutely one of the things we talk about is the child at the center. But when we're talking about the organizations that we work in and work for, it's absolutely important to safeguard the people, the communities, the children we work with, and also making sure that the people who work for us, the employees, any volunteers, anyone who comes into contact with our organization is safeguarded. And there have been a number of high-profile incidences where things have gone wrong. And in particular, it's been the mishandling of those incidences that have really been damaging for organizations and for the sector. So in particular, you have issues with reputational risk. There is increased media scrutiny, and ultimately the knock-on effect is this can affect your income, donors, funders, affects the stakeholders, supporters, and at the end of the day, the people who ultimately suffer are the communities, the people we're serving, and also those who come into contact with our organization, and you end up with a failed mission and increased and even worsening harm. Next slide, please. So in terms of thinking around the lessons in managing safeguarding concerns, I like to think of it as 3 key elements that are intertwined like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. So this is around robust systems, culture, and accountability. And of course, these always overlap, and this will be alluded to. So when we think about robust systems, the things that really springs to mind are the importance of having policies and procedures in place. And I've come across a number of organizations, and some can be quite high profile, where actually just basic having things written down in black and white isn't actually there. So it's really important to have policies and procedures, that those are updated, that those are relevant, and not just used as a tick box exercise. These need to be survivor-centered. You know, from that point of view, as opposed to serving the benefit of the organization per se. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when we think about culture and accountability, absolutely what is key is leadership. And when I reflect on my experiences and looking across the sector where things have gone wrong, what is often lacking or often brought to light is the role of leadership. And that is at board level and also across sort of senior leaders within the organization. And it's often said that everything rises and falls on leadership. So leadership is absolutely clear, and I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. And it's very important that leaders are role models in setting the tone and the standards. It's often spoken about that safeguarding is everyone's business. And this really is important when we start to think about the culture and how that is fostered. And everyone needs to understand the policies and procedures, but needs to have a clear view of what their role is in recognizing, responding, reporting, and playing into that. It's very important to be transparent, and particularly when we think about the high-profile cases that have been highlighted in the media or just in the sector in general. And one of the things that is often found is the lack of transparency. It's very important that organizations don't wait for an event to be spotlighted for them to react. It's really important to be transparent, to be open, to foster a culture of learning. And this is really key when we're thinking about instances that may be near misses, or just even instances that have caused significant harm, but fostering that transparency, that learning, so people are able to speak up. And this, again, brings around collaboration, and it's really important in ensuring that the organization gets the best from its people. When we speak about safeguarding, the issue of intersectionality and thinking about diversity, equality, and inclusion matters. We look at some of the instances that have happened and how this overlaps with power, privilege, hierarchy, and how that plays out. And when we're thinking particularly in international development, how we work with very vulnerable communities, if we're working in international humanitarian sector, this is even so more important. And yes, there has been a spotlight on these matters in the last couple of years, but it is absolutely important as leaders that we are embracing this and seeing the intersectionality and the importance of having within our safeguarding culture. Next slide, please. So when we think about organizational accountability and the impact on organizational culture and what has made a difference, it's important, as I mentioned earlier on, that policies and procedures, having the piece of paper in black and white on its own, is not going to get the job done. But it's absolutely paramount that that is there as part of your accountability. That absolutely needs to be there, but you need to be very mindful that you need to do more. What's brought about the importance of this is there's increased national and international regulation. So whether that's the Charity Commission, FCDO, or we're thinking more globally, and if we are working in organizations that are implementing in countries abroad, abiding by the national regulations, that is really, really more important and has been brought to light. And there's also an increased public scrutiny and visibility, and we are accountable to our funders, to our supporters, and they have much better visibility when things go wrong, and absolutely when things go right as well. That is to be celebrated. Next slide, please. So this is my final slide, just to highlight some of the organizational things that have happened, changes that have happened, that I see from my reflections and my experiences that have actually led to improved organizational culture. The importance of leadership being visible. It's often with larger organizations, potentially you have a safeguarding trustee, but it's so important that actually the responsibility is acknowledged and shared by all, because when there is an issue, it is not the safeguarding trustee on their own or the board chair, it is the board as a collective that have that shared responsibility. So leadership being visible, leadership being accountable and actually owning that and having a really thorough understanding. And one of the things that I've tried to foster in all the organizations I've been in is the importance of board members and trustees having robust safeguarding training to understand their legal responsibilities, but also to empower them to be able to lead as a collective to the wider organization. It's important that leadership are respectful to others, particularly those who are sort of lower cadres within their organizations potentially, and showing that respect and fostering that and role modeling that is important. It cannot be underestimated the importance of addressing power, privilege, and the D&I agenda, as some of the safeguarding instances that have arisen have been managed incorrectly because of a misunderstanding, lack of understanding of the importance of power, privilege, and these issues. The importance of learning, so fostering that learning throughout the organization brings about what improved accountability. And lastly, which I know my colleagues will speak more to, is having organizational culture reports, competencies and charters, and in the same way that we might track our financial health, but actually seeing how we are doing in terms of our organizational accountability and subsequently culture when it comes to safeguarding. Those are my initial thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tsitsi. A really good reminder, and thank you for setting the scene so eloquently. And certainly, you know, the fact that you sit on several boards of several international NGOs really does shine through. You've talked about leadership, you've talked about transparency, you've talked about intersectionality, and also the push and pull factors of regulation, not only by our donors, but regulatory bodies. If it's in here in the UK, the Charities Commission. And also, I think, you know, the importance of public scrutiny in bringing about greater accountability in our organizations is also a key factor. And I really like how you've described not just leadership, but visible leadership, joint collective responsibility of the board and, you know, and senior managers. The importance of being respectful within leadership, I think, is an important point in addressing power and privilege to bring about that cultural change. And I really like the, you know, the whole cultural reporting, gauging progress and actually marking down that progress, celebrating that progress, but also ensuring, you know, that we're learning lessons as we go along. So we move now on, thank you, to Andrew with the CHS Alliance. Andrew, you know, Tsitsi has set the scene, and if you could then respond perhaps to this question, what are some of the principles, tools, and resources that would be helpful for leaders when managing and investigating safeguarding concerns? And how could we gauge if there has been an improvement in accountability and learning in the sector, and if there's any evidence to that effect? Thank you, Andrew.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending where in the world you are. And thank you, Jan, thank you, Anita, for the opportunity to present on the IQTS today. Next slide, please. And next. So what is the IQTS? I suppose it's easier for me to explain. It's just a four-tiered training scheme to basically increase the quality and standard of investigations conducted in the humanitarian and development sector. There's an identified need to conduct best practice survivor-focused investigations in the sector. Historically, I think investigations have been more organisation focused, what's best for the organisation. And obviously we're seeing a requirement and a move to survivor focused. I think most, if not all of us, are aware of increased donor requirements around PSEAH. And that also involves investigations. Investigations don't stand alone. They're part of a system where you need a public-facing complaints mechanism, robust and well-conducted investigations, a good sanction process, and also involving the misconduct disclosure scheme, that they all work together. You need all those pieces to have an effective prevention and response mechanism to SEAH. So you can see the slide there. It's a 4-tiered certification-based training scheme that builds professional skills in SEAH investigations and establishes a professional standard for investigators. Next slide, please. And as I've explained, it's being done to drive up standards for investigations and to provide practical survivor-centred framework. So we're very focused on the scheme and the training, that it's survivor focused and it's best practice. These are two very important tenets of the scheme. And also obviously it's to bring perpetrators of SEAH to account for their actions and support accountability to survivors. It's very important that the investigations withstand scrutiny and hold up to being tested. So they've got to be done right to make sure we're doing the best we can for the survivors of SEAH. Next slide, please. Can you hear? There we go. So the how, it's a 4-tiered scheme supporting progressively advanced levels of professional training and the maintenance of practitioner level qualifications through continual learning and support from an investigations community of practice. So you start with tier 1, you progress to tier 2, you go to tier 3, which is the advanced practitioner investigation. And then tier 4 is, we don't believe a certification should be set and forget. So just like a lot of other industry qualifications, it would have a 2-year life, your qualification, and then within that 2 years, you would have to accomplish certain things to extend that qualification. Next slide, please. So it's small font because I tried to fit it on the one slide, but tier 1 is the foundations of SEAH investigations. That's a free course of 2 online modules. It's available on the Disaster Ready platform for free right now. So you can go on to Disaster Ready, do the tier 1 and get the tier 1 certificate. The tier 1 certificate, the purpose of that tier 1 course is not to equip you to undertake investigations, but to give you basic knowledge of how investigations are conducted. So after successfully completing tier 1, you'll get a certificate, and you need to have completed tier 1 to undertake tier 2. Tier 2 is a 5 learning week course comprised of 10 self-study modules. There'll be 3 facilitated webinars and a chat forum. And an online externally delivered multiple choice exam. The purpose of tier 2 is to equip participants to undertake investigations under supervision. So you wouldn't be the lead investigator in a SEAH investigation. You would have a lead investigator with you, and you would be under their supervision to learn a little bit more about the practical application of what you've learned in tier 2. After completing tier 2 and undertaking a couple of the supervised investigations, you would then qualify to enroll in tier 3, the advanced investigation practitioner level. This is a 5-day face-to-face course delivered by experienced facilitators who all have extensive SEAH investigation experience. And the course, similar to the one we run at the moment, includes simulation exercises and a practical assessment to assess aptitude, behaviour, skill and knowledge, things like soft skills that are very important. And the purpose of tier 3 is to equip participants to undertake investigations without supervision. And as I mentioned earlier, the tier 4, the qualification maintenance, tier 2 and 3 qualifications, which are the practitioner level, you need to maintain that qualification through a required amount of continuing education credits through such things as investigation experience, webinars and participation in the investigation community of practice. Next slide. More information is available on our website. Our new SEAH investigation guide is available on our website. It's quite a comprehensive document. It's available in English and a couple of other languages right now, and we're going to translate it into a few more languages in the future. There's also a toolkit available through our website, which has some good tools and templates for investigations. You can also register your interest in the IQTS through our website, or you can contact me at that email address on the screen there. Sorry, Anita, you did mention some questions at the start of the slide.
Would you like to take them now, or would you?
Yes, you just mentioned a couple of things.
Yeah, it was really about you've shared the resource of IQTS, and it's great to see the the book of knowledge that's been already out there, and the disaster ready resource. Just about, how do you think such resources and standards could actually improve accountability and learning in the sector? And is there any evidence to this effect?
I think the idea is that previously investigations were done differently depending on the organisation or who was doing the investigation. So we needed to adopt a common standard that is survivor focused and best practice. That's the most important thing, and that it's done consistently throughout the sector. To me, that's the most important thing. So for organisations, most, if not all of you are aware of the increased donor requirements around PSEAH and conducting investigations. And we see in the future that this would be a donor requirement, that investigations are conducted by people who are certified under that scheme, either within your organisation or that you contract to undertake investigations. So we hope and we think that this will become a sector-wide standard. So that will mean your organisations that you're confident that your investigations are best practice and survivor focused. So when you receive a complaint and you assign it for investigation, you get somebody that's gone through this scheme. You can be confident that the investigations are going to be done to the standard required, not only by your organisation, but by donors as well, which is very important. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, as you say, if you have a standardized approach of being survivor focused, you have a better chance of ensuring that we keep people safe throughout that process as well. Thank you, Andrew. Excellent. We're going to move on now to Lisa. So Lisa is the Executive Director of the Global Interagency Security Forum. Lisa, in your experience and in your research, what are leaders doing well? And what do you think that some of the areas of improvement have been about managing safeguarding concerns? I know that in your presentation, you have tools and resources that have been developed by GISF to support leaders in this role. And in your experience, if there's any lessons learned that you've come across in your work in terms of improving organizational accountability. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Anita. And hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to join this interesting and really important discussion that we're having today. I think the management of the safeguarding issues has evolved dramatically in the humanitarian sector over the last few years. And there's been a lot of improvement, but I still think there's more to come, more to learn. And while there's a large overlap between managing staff safety and security and safeguarding, when the current safeguarding debate hit the sector in particular, security was actually seen as part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And as safeguarding threats are born out of power imbalance, traditional security people such as peacekeepers, private security providers are in that position of power. However, humanitarian security staff are often going to be the first port of call when an incident happens in country level. So we're really trying to work together to integrate these sort of two components together. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, and next. So just to explain, GISF, we are a networking organisation. We currently have about 140 organisations who are represented by the global and regional security leads. And our membership is made up not only of humanitarian organisations, but also development and human rights-based organisations. And it's this foundation, I suppose, of organisation which allows GISF to undertake the research that we do, because all of our products are based on inputs and best practice from our members. So we sort of work on the principle we don't all need to make the same mistakes, but we can learn from those that have been through these and sort of pull all of that best practice together. Just to sort of flag, in 2019, we changed from EISF, which was the European Interagency Security Forum. So you'll see a lot of our guides and research pieces, we reference EISF because they were published before we made that transition, but it is the same organization. Next slide, please. So within GISF, we started looking at the safeguarding topic in detail around about 2017, where we're looking at managing incidents of sexual violence against aid workers in particular. The first issue that came up when we were doing the research was who is responsible for managing incidents of sexual violence. So quite fundamental. And in many organizations, this was, and unfortunately still is, not clear. What we found was generally on paper, it was within the Human Resources Department, but at country level, it fell within the purview of the security manager. So while the security team dealt with the aftermath of incidents, those incidents were generally not recorded within any formal reporting or management system, which we found meant that most organizations did not see sexual violence as an issue, because when they looked at their incident registers, they would say, well, we have no incidents, so it's not a problem for us. So this led to many discussions within the sector. And for us, recognizing that most perpetrators of sexual violence are actually known to the victims, most organizations now include both internal as well as external threats within their security planning processes. And this is particularly when it comes to prevention and preparedness. And to do this, most organizations use a version of the risk matrix. And it's often used as a tool for security planning. It looks at the probability or the likelihood of an incident happening, as well as what would be the impact if such an incident did happen. But it can also be used for safeguarding risks. And I think it's a simple to use tool, which can be very effective. So if you think of a safeguarding threat, such as those highlighted in the scenarios in the Managing Sexual Violence Guide, Tool 1, which I know is included in this course. You have harassment, you have sexual assault and rape. And you can use this matrix, but everyone will have a different perspective when it comes to considering the likelihood and impact of these threats. Therefore, doing this exercise, doing this assessment should not be done by one person on their own, and particularly not the security manager, who is often an international staff member or a national staff member with a military background. If they sit in a room on their own doing this assessment, it will not provide information that is relevant to the staff across the organisation, because they just won't understand those different perspectives. For senior leadership, as well as being involved in the process themselves, because they will have their own perspective, they should ensure that whoever is leading the process does ensure a good cross-section of employees are involved. And this should be the same when you use the sort of the scenario exercises in Tool 1 in the guide. It really enables senior leadership to work with their teams and colleagues to understand the different roles, responsibilities, and reactions when dealing, well, not only with dealing with incidents, but also for that planning and preparation and hopefully prevention of incidents happening in the first place. So next slide. One of the other key issues which came up in the research for the guide was the fact that the organisation also has a duty of care towards the alleged perpetrators if they are employees of the organisation. And in the discussions, it became, this is often seen as distasteful, but it is essential as part of the overall management of an incident. So the outcome of these various discussions are captured in the 2019 guide, and it really provides practical advice for staff, not only responsible for staff safety and security directly, but also project leads and senior managers and people within the human resources function. Next slide, please. About 8 years ago, EISF undertook a research piece on gender and security. And while this raised many important issues, it became apparent that gender is only one aspect of a person's personal profile that impacts their safety and security. So in 2018, we completed the research on managing the security of aid workers with diverse profiles. So this means if we're going to effectively manage security risks, next slide, please. If we're going to effectively manage security risks, we need to understand people, who they are as individuals. And this is particularly important when it comes to safeguarding risks, as our individual profile will have a direct impact on how vulnerable we are to these risks. And we have to remember this includes both visible and invisible characteristics. So take a moment to think about who you are. What might others perceive of you because of what they see? And what biases do you have because of the experiences of who you are? And each one of us will have something different here. And if we think about power imbalance as the thing that enables the safeguarding issues and threats around, there are some obvious power imbalances. There is gender, there's privilege, in some contexts, ethnicity, etc. But they're not the only ones. If we move to the next slide, please. And I think what we found particularly worrying in the research that we undertook was for staff who identified as part of the LGBTQI community or those with a disability, they feared threats from within the organisation and the sector, so people that they knew, far more than from external actors. So if we think back to the idea that security plans tended to only look at external threats, so many of our staff were actually more concerned about internal threats. So we can also use the risk matrix from an individual perspective, because an organisation will perhaps identify the probability and impact differently as we might do ourselves. And it's also important for us as individuals to recognise where our own threshold of acceptable risk is within this sort of matrix. Okay, next slide. So the original underlying premise of the research when we undertook it was the need to try and balance an organisation's duty of care responsibilities, particularly the legal responsibilities. And at this time, the Steve Dennis versus NRC case was very prominent in the minds of a lot of humanitarian organisations. So we're really looking at their legal duty of care responsibilities. But at the same time, what we don't want to do is contravene anti-discrimination legislation. And it's very difficult sometimes to meet your duty of care obligations by assuming everybody is the same. So when we think about this sort of who we are as an individual, we need to know some of those things or understand the impact that those different personal profiles will have on the way that we manage security risks. And hopefully this paper offers some practical guidance on what we can do as individuals, organisations, and particularly as leaders to tackle some of these issues. Next slide, please. And I think this is one of the interesting things when we consider how to tackle safeguarding threats. Many organisations do have a zero tolerance policy, though often it's not understood what that means and how it can be implemented. But it really is essential if we're going to prevent serious safeguarding issues and incidents. So as an example, so many years ago, as I say, started as an engineer. And when I started, there had been a real shift in the way health and safety was being implemented in the UK. And that was based on pyramid identified by Bird, a sequence of numbers that was pulled together, which recognized that if you're actually going to reduce the number of deaths, the number of really serious incidents, you need to reduce the number of trip hazards that make up the base of the pyramid, because it's quite difficult to change the practices which will alter the behavior that causes the one-off serious incident. But it's relatively easy to change behaviors that cause the minor incidents or trip hazards. And the same approach can be applied to safeguarding problems. And while it's not easy to tackle sometimes, you know, the people's attitudes and beliefs directly, when one can stop the racist remarks, the gender degrading jokes, etc., that form that sort of base of the pyramid. And if these are seen as unacceptable, then the accidental touching, the quick grope, and things like that become out of place. And staff can see that their behaviours are unacceptable and they're less likely to escalate into the serious incidents. However, and I think this goes back to what Dr. Tsitsi was saying, this isn't going to happen only if it's an organisational policy, but it really requires senior leaders to develop an organisational culture and a team that is supportive to all. And we do know that this isn't easy. Next slide. What often stands in the way of this supportive behaviour is what's known as the bystander phenomenon. And there's been quite a lot of research around this, and so these are some of the basic findings. People are less likely to intervene when others are present. And this is because people will assume that someone else is more qualified and that they will intervene. So within an office setting, another manager, somebody's friend, somebody else. It's always, you know, I don't want to intervene because I think somebody else will. And that fear of embarrassment, if you think, well, maybe I don't have the skills, what happens if my help is rejected? Am I making a mistake? But the interesting thing is that once one person intervenes, others are likely to follow. Next slide, please. So this is another tool which is quite easy to use to develop a supportive team. And you can bring people together to think about how you might tackle this bystander phenomenon. And to think about how can you intervene safely if you see something untoward happening. But again, this exercise needs to be done as a team, both to create that sort of mutual support. But if you think back to our personal profiles, the way I intervene safely as a white woman, somewhat older, will be very different to how a man of colour might intervene or a younger person. So again, really, I mean, working that a varied team, a diverse team will actually be much stronger because it has all of these different strengths to bring to it, to work together. And the last slide. So that's where you can find out more information. Do go and have a look. There are lots of useful resources and tools available there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Excellent. Some really good research that you shared with us and some brilliant tools as well. You've talked about the leadership tool that we have on the course that we've signposted learners to. The risk assessments, again, we've got a template also that you've also shared how you gauge the risk with the impact and the likelihood. The pyramid was an interesting one as well. I've never seen that, and thank you for sharing that. The bystander effect, and taking your victim stroke survivor as they are, and and not assuming that thresholds, for one are the same for the other in terms of acceptable, risk to themselves. And I thought how you articulated the fact that actually sometimes internal threats that is the more that causes people more concern than perhaps the external threats. So some really interesting points there. Right, we move swiftly on then to our last speaker, Anne Mariah, Director of Organizational Learning at Thrive Worldwide. So in the midst of managing safeguarding concerns, why do you think it's important to care for oneself and others? And if there are any tools or resources and support where we could look to support us through that, particularly lessons learned in respect of the work that you do with international development practitioners and leaders. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Anita. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a great pleasure to be here. You're probably all familiar with the instruction by flight attendants as part of the pre-flight instruction that should the air pressure drop and the oxygen masks drop down, you should put on your own oxygen mask before helping those around you. Now, if you think of the point that Dr. Cici raised around leaders being role models, this is similar to wearing your own mask. And so what we realize is that the environment that leaders are working within when we're working with the safeguarding concerns is an environment that's rather sensitive. There's different material one's looking at, different accounts one's hearing, and it's really, really important that one is able to look after themselves. And so we do encourage leaders to prioritize self-care, because it's only then that you are in the right frame of mind to show up authentically, to be empathetic, to have the energy to have difficult conversations, all the while demonstrating care and concern for all those involved. Now, at Thrive Worldwide, we support leaders to build their well-being as well as their teams. And this might look like resilience check-ins, where leaders have individual one-on-one sessions. And one of the things we do encourage is, where possible, if a leader can do the deep work, the deep internal, emotional, and mental work to recognize their vulnerabilities, their biases, so that they're able to uncover and dismantle them. If you think of the pyramid that Lisa's just shown us, you're looking at some deep-seated beliefs, values, and these can be really uncovered as you do that deep work. And when you think about the safeguarding culture that's required, working on oneself as a leader is a journey, and it's a journey that helps you understand when you're being triggered and what to do about that. Because it's one thing, as Dr. Cici said earlier, to have these robust systems, to have this culture and to press into accountability. But it's another thing when you as the leader have issues that make it difficult to honestly and authentically maintain a zero tolerance on some of the aspects. The other bit is around well-being sessions, where we look and help support with strategies on how to look after one's holistic well-being. Holistic, we're looking at physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. I have found, particularly, I'll say this, particularly during the COVID time, and there's all sorts of things going on. We know a lot of things, but it's another thing to actually apply those things. So what does it look like for a leader who's under lots of pressure, who's got lots of priorities that seem to be shifting all along, to look after themselves, make sure they're eating well on the run, make sure they're engaging healthy sleep patterns, regular exercise. This is a priority that we need to all have. Having supportive, meaningful relationships, because you need that support as you go in through the strain of some of the things that we experience when the organization is even going through safeguarding concern. Practicing mindfulness, the ability to just slow down, stop and be in the present. There's things like breathing exercise that you may know of. There's a gratitude practice. I know of someone who takes a picture of something that they're grateful for in a day on their phone, and it reminds them that it doesn't matter what they're hearing and how dark some things seem to be, there is still something that they can appreciate. And so, you know, engaging in meaningful activities where you're helping other people, these are all practices that really do feel like common sense, but you would be surprised how many leaders don't do them because there's no time to do them. Yet if we were to invest in oneself in doing these things, then you stand yourself better to care for others and to model self-care, which they then can carry on, and it will serve them well, particularly as the stress of managing some of these concerns increases. And so we say, if one is struggling, reach out and find people who can support you. And at Thrive on our website, we have resources that are helpful. But as I finish up, I think I want to say that we recognize that leaders are really key in setting the culture. There are times, unfortunately, you will find that an organization will go through the whole safeguarding thing as a tick box exercise. But what does it look like when a leader recognizes that as staff listen to what the survivor has been through, they are reliving that experience vicariously, and therefore there is stress being built up, and they therefore require that they are supported, that self-care, it becomes a priority so that one isn't going into burnout. And so those are just some of the things that are important to be thinking about. And, you know, I was thinking about our mobile phones and how we always make sure they're well charged. The battery is fully charged before we go somewhere we're not very sure, you know, whether we'll find a power source or not. What would it look like if leaders ensured that their internal resources were fully charged? Because you have no idea what the safeguarding concern looks like, but you know your battery's full. And so our encouragement is, you know, it's worth doing the work of caring for yourself so that you're able to care for others from this perspective of having a full cup. And so, yeah, so thank you very much.
Thank you, and brilliant. Thank you so much for your reflections around authentic leadership, slowing down, breathing, being more mindful about what you're doing. And I love your imagery around, you know, you put your mask on before you put the mask on for somebody else that you might be caring for, and, you know, making sure that your battery's full at all times, because you don't know when you're going to be called upon to face some really challenging situations. Colleagues, thank you so much for your questions on the chat box. I see that the speakers have been responding to you, which is brilliant. And we will be sharing a copy of this recording, as well as the resources that have been shared on this webinar today. Again, my apologies that we started a bit late. We are slightly out of time. But I want to just go back to Dr. Sitsi for one or two last words, please, as our first speaker in terms of leadership. You talked about visible leadership. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that? Perhaps one or two words?
Thank you. It's just to stress really what is being a visible, present leader, and what is it to carry the team and to role model the good behaviors. And I think that can't be stressed enough. It's good, to have a lovely bookshelf full of procedures and policies, but it's how you move from that to actually having a brilliant organizational culture where everyone truly is embracing safeguarding as their business and everyone truly embraces their responsibilities. And that is all the unspoken, the soft skills really are so important in achieving that.
Thank you, Dr. Tsitsi. And thank you to all our wonderful speakers for putting aside some time this afternoon. Thank you for your preparation. And we know that everyone's really busy. And learners, thank you for all the discussions that you've been having online on the course. We are monitoring that and we're supporting you in your journey. There have been lots and lots of tools and resources out there which can be shared, and we need to keep sharing them because we need to obviously look after ourselves as we deal with some really, really technical and difficult situations. So thank you again. And goodbye, and we will see you on webinar 3 on the 14th of June. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.